Building a heap of compost is an art. It's an art as much as a science. They're difficult to be too scientific about it and quantitative because the materials one is adding vary all the time. No two gardens are the same, so the materials you will have will not be the same as what I'm adding here. They'll be perhaps broadly similar, but always subtle differences. So don't worry too much about being precise. What I want to show you here is how I do it and using that to illustrate the broad principles. For example, the mix of green and brown, which really helps if you can get it roughly, say, half and half green, half and half brown. But what is green, what is brown? So I'll mention that with each material I'm adding, whether it's green or brown. And I'll just preface that by sometimes in books and talks it's described as carbon to nitrogen balance, which rather confuses things because the proportion given is 32 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. And it's like, okay, that's the same as roughly, I estimate, 60% green to 40% brown. A huge difference in those two ratios. And that's because a lot of green materials, what I'm calling green, actually have quite a bit of brown in. You know, not very few things are pure green and very few things are pure brown. And that's where it comes back to being, you kind of got to assess roughly and just get an idea of the balance. And then you can judge by your finished result how well you've done it. If you add a lot of green, like for example, this is some grass I just mowed, including some quite long bits of grass and nettles and things. That is mostly green, but within this grass there is, see, that's like a bit of old grass that went through the mower, and that's going towards being a bit brown because it's got more stem, it's quite tough and sinewy. So although within this broadly green material there's also a bit of brown, I mean I would estimate that is 3/4 green, 1/4 brown, just for the sake of argument. And then on top here is peas which I chopped with a spade. So these are some peas which I cleared from a bed this morning. They just finished, and it's interesting to see how mouldy the leaves are going, mildew, which is typical of old leaves. That is fine to put on a compost heap. I get asked often, you know, can I put diseased material on a compost heap? The answer is, for me, is an unqualified yes. Yeah, this is a heap of magic and alchemy here. There's more than science going on in the compost heap in my book. You know, it's just fantastic what the transformation that happens. And I have not noticed a problem with diseases carrying over from the composting process. So I had, for example, I'll add blighted, late blight material like from potatoes and tomatoes. I had rust from garlic leaves. Everything goes in here. And actually, just on that note, let me mention, you know, one or two things that I know cause concern. That's a seeding forget-me-not, actually, which I just pulled up to show you. The point being, there's a lot of viable seeds on there, and that's the one example of something which will benefit from heat. Everything else that I'm mentioning, your heat doesn't have to get hot to kill these diseases. They're not magic things which can survive forever diseases. They need a living host. Just in the case of blight, if they don't have living tissue, the blight spores die. So they die in compost and soil. So you don't need to worry about putting that on. But with the seeds, I would put them more in the middle of a heap where there's likely to be the most heat. Yeah, there's a thistle which is just going to seed, a creeping thistle. I'm handling it quite carefully. And that's fine now, but within a week or maybe 10 days, that could be seeding. We're in the second week of July here, and that classic time for thistles to develop seeds. So that's going in there. And then nettle, so stinging nettle, which also seeds at this time of year. You can get a lot of seeds from a stalk of nettle like this. But again, I'm very happy to put that in. I'll mention more about the heat in a minute. And then this is something else that's often given a bad press, rhubarb leaves. Yes, you can compost them. I honestly know no good reason why not. I don't know how all these sort of, well, I'd call them myths really, or misunderstandings, you know, develop. Once they've been repeated enough, then they start to enter the general belief. So let's have a look at, if I unscrew my front. And what I want to show you is how we're building in layers. Why build in layers? And the answer is to get an even spread. So that is some grass that we mowed yesterday, and it's actually not too visible on the edge, but we did layer it with some brown material, which is soil, and I've actually got some miscanthus grass. It's like a straw. It's a perennial grass that is combined by farmers and they sell it, and that's a brown material. It's dry stem basically. Here you can see it's vegetable waste, like there's a charred stalk and stem. There's some more peas from when we were clearing before. The brown actually is not quite as visible as I'd hoped, but this is example of brown, so rooty things and a bit of soil. And generally, although that looks pretty green, you can see there's quite a lot of stem here. That's like pea stem. So that's where you're going towards. Some of the green has quite a bit of brown, particularly now as we're going from summer towards autumn. Spring is the height of the green season. Summer is a bit more balanced green and brown, and then autumn's more brown and winter's very brown. So you've got at different seasons, you have different materials. And I'm just wondering how I'm going to get this one back in. This could be interesting because it's coming out a bit. I do need to get this in. You can see this is like, why have a heap at all? Why not just make compost in open? And the answer is a heap will hold in the materials, make it tidier, it'll hold in the heat. And do you notice how I've got solid sides here? It's often said that compost heaps should have slatted sides to allow some passage of air. Air is a vital ingredient in compost making because that is what bacteria breathe on to live and multiply, and they do a lot of the breakdown, and they're what bring the heat. This is the green, which is going to make the heat, a lot of heat. So if I put this grass on, so I'm looking, the reason for the layering is so that you can more easily portion out the green and brown and just get it evenly added. So, it's never perfect, but that's a layer of green. Now we have some brown. This is, believe it or not, this is wood chip, which is nearly a year old. And I run the lawnmower over it. The lawnmower is a very useful tool for chopping things up. The finer you get things adding to a heap, the more quickly they will break down. And because this wood is already 10 months old, it's going to break down more quickly in the compost heap and go to quite finished compost. But I'm not worried if I get little bits of wood in my compost. Compost can be, yeah, you can see this is kind of almost looking like compost already, which is fine. So this is very much a brown. I would say there's very little green in this edition. And this is where it's very good if you can have a store of browns during spring and summer, because there's a lot of green materials coming available. Here's another brown, which is soil. Why is soil brown? Well, it's just inert. Another definition of green is nitrogen. So that's fast acting, like fresh manure is green. About 3% nitrogen, so is our coffee grounds mostly. And so they're kind of activators, and urine is green. But soil, a heap of soil will not get hot. You know, that's one definition of green, that you'd put it in a heap and it will get hot. Soil does not do that. And this is just a bit of homemaker soil I had spare. So that is a great brown to add, not in huge quantity. If you put too much soil in, you'll get a lot of soil out again. It doesn't really break down into anything new. I did find some of these mostly green materials to show you, because again I get asked a lot about this. I expect some of you will know that that's a bindweed root that's going on. Then I get asked, okay, it's all very well for you, Charles, because you've got a big heap and it gets hot. I wouldn't put my bindweed roots on because my heap is not like that. I totally accept that point, but in my experience I've made small heaps as well, and these roots, you know, they're not indestructible. We give them too much credence. I know that they seem invincible, but I assure you they're not. They're not like hydras that are going to just spring out the compost heap. There's only so much energy in a root like that. So if you can keep it, even on the edge of this heap, if I put it there, not so hot, if you can keep light off it while it'll be trying to grow. It'll either be trying to grow or it'll get too hot and then die from that. And as it tries to grow, it's using up its energy and then withering at the end. So I can assure you that as long as you don't just put a lot on the heap and leave them to grow, basically, which they would if you didn't cover them. But I'm putting on bindweed couch grass here, for example. Lovely roots of couch grass. And actually, you know, really good additions for a heap. There's goodness in this. So that's going on. There's bits of ivy, more bindweed, all good to go. A creeping thistle. Actually, there's a nice creeping thistle here with a, that's a perennial creeping thistle with its root. You know, I'd happily put on all of that root. All good stuff. Here's some of the miscanthus I mentioned. So that's old dry grass from a farm. What I've got there is actually a pretty good green and brown so far, but I'm going to put this on, which is pretty much both actually. So a shredder is a useful tool if you've got a big garden. I would say for probably most allotments, and allotments often get delivered wood chips, so you're fine. It's more if you've got woody material that you want to compost. A shredder opens up the possibility to put in shrubs and stems, and green wood is best, soft wood, not too dry, but it will. This was some quite dry wood actually, and you can see how it's broken it up into pieces as well as cutting it, and that's all good because that exposes more surface area to bacteria to break down. So this is actually quite a 50-50 mix of green and brown, but the woody lumps in there are great for holding a bit of air in the heap. So that's another aspect of this brown compared to soil. Soil that won't really hold air so much, but brown material, woody material, is very good for that. And you can see my heaps are quite large. It's actually 1.5 metre square roughly. That's 5 feet square. And I made it this size because I judged Homeacres, which is a 3,000 square metre, 3/4 acre area. The vegetables is just 1/3 of that, but there's quite a lot of grassy, woody edges. So by how much material I have, I want to make roughly 5 heaps a year. And that's pretty much working. So you want to balance the size of your compost heap according to your area that you have. And then for many of you, you won't have enough area or materials to make a lot of compost. This is a bit like the argument of how easy is it to be self-sufficient in vegetables. You know, how easy is it to be self-sufficient in making your own compost? Actually really quite difficult unless you get very good at scrounging. Ask your neighbours. During lockdown here, we had our local recycling place was closed, and one or two of my neighbours kept bringing wheelbarrows of their trimmings from their garden, either stuff that we could shred or mown grass or whatever. And yeah, I was thrilled, and they were happy. So put word out that you're up for receiving anything. You hopefully will be surprised. Cafes for coffee grounds, whatever it might be. Then the question of temperature. So this is you can buy these compost thermometers, is what they're called, for about £10. And don't worry if your heap doesn't get hot. You can make nice compost without a heap getting hot. but if it does get hot, it will just happen more quickly. And at this time of year, spring, summer, going into early autumn, there's usually enough green that it will get hot if you've got enough. If you don't have a lot of volume, it won't again, I'm afraid. That's where scrounging and having enough basic material is what's necessary for heat. But if you don't, your heat will just moulder in a nice way and take longer. Like a heap of leaf mould, for example. You know, that often doesn't get very hot. Old tree leaves put in a heap at the end of autumn, and they will gradually turn into compost. You know, everything turns into compost in the end. My definition of compost is not like perfect, it's just decomposed material. That is all good to go on the soil to feed soil life. That's what I'm looking for, not the perfect. But yeah, the heat, this one's almost embarrassingly hot. Actually, it's a shade over 70 degrees centigrade there, which is, it's over 160 Fahrenheit. And that's a little bit more than the books recommend, because when you get that hot, you're losing a bit of fungal quality. Fungi, mycelia, don't like it too hot. This is more bacterial decomposition at this temperature. What I'm finding though is that heat like that, it doesn't last for long. It's a flash of heat when you put on new green material. Then if I didn't add anything there for a week, say, that would drop to 60, 65, and that's a good heat. And I find the fungi actually do survive this process that I'm doing anyway, because when we come to turn the heap, we turn it just once. We find a lot of white threads and it smells nice, so that's encouraging. You know, these are all things that tell you if you're doing it in the best way. So that's useful just to keep an eye on it, really. And watering. I'm often asked about this as well, because some people say you should always water your compost heap and water all ingredients before adding. And that advice needs qualifying. It's not bad advice, but it doesn't apply. I would say it doesn't apply to what I've added here on camera this afternoon. For me, all this material has got moisture in enough that as it breaks down like grass, that moisture in there, it's quite wet, or quite damp I should say, it's not physically wet. Its moisture will come out and keep the compost heap to a good degree of moisture, enough moisture. If you have too much moisture, that displaces air, so we come back to oxygen, and that's why overwatering is not good. We water here, usually in just very dry weather, like we had a very dry May this year, and I was watering the heaps. If there wasn't enough green, fresh matter, that's when you need to water, but don't assume that you have to water. And actually, I've got the roof here because our climate can be quite wet, and again, that means too much moisture displacing air. And since I've had the roof, which is 3 years now, the quality of my compost has gone up quite a bit. I'm really happy with it. I will show you the result in just a minute. I just want to say about finishing. So I put the dates up here. We started this one on the 11th of June. Today, it's 11th of July actually, so it's exactly 1 month, 30 days since we started it. I reckon normally about 6 weeks, so, but you know, this is not written in stone. These are broad figures to give you an idea. Your garden will be different. But as a rule of thumb, I reckon to build it and build it and build it until, say, about shoulder height, and that's enough. But when you're building it, you know, it's been up at this level a few times already, then it keeps sinking. And then we'll build up again, then it keeps sinking, and you're going up and down, up and down, up and down. And there comes a time when you're sort of up here and it's then sinking quite slowly. And I'll make the call at that point, right, that's enough there. Because it will then sink. Behind me here is a heap. Where my hand is there, that's the level. Whereas when we finished this one, it was up here. So that's a heap that we finished exactly a month ago. It's actually still hot. The one pretty warm. The temperature showing 55 degrees on this one here still. 1 month after its last material added. And what we do is we turn it then into the empty bay to the right just once. For me, you can ignore all that advice about turning frequently. I mean, you can if you want, but it's not necessary. And also, you know, people talk about making compost and every time you turn it, it loses carbon. Well, exactly. So just don't do it very often. And I find that one turn is really worthwhile because it's a chance to remix and get a much more even result, which will save you time when you come to spread it. You've got lovely material then, which is actually here, for example. This is compost that we finished. It was turned into here on the 11th of October last year, and it had been made in the heap to the left of it as you look at it during September and early October. No, sorry, during August actually. Yeah, that's right. It was started on 3rd of August, finished 20th September. So that was late summer heap. And then on the 11th of October, we take the side out and turn it into the next heap. And so that's been sitting there since 11th of October. We're now 11th of July, and it was made mostly during August. So it's 10 or 11 months old, and this is what it looks like. I'll actually tip out this bucket so you can see the kind of consistency of what's in there, and how, you know, there are some lumps and there's some bits of twig and wood. That is fine to go on the ground. It's even good because that's fungal decomposition on the surface, feeding mycelia in the soil. So I don't sieve or sift that. That is going to go on exactly as you see coming out of that bucket there. And there's some lovely stuff in there, and there's some quite lumpy bits. All fine. And so there you have a little resume of making compost, and go for it. Make as much as you can. Whether you can make enough to feed all your cropping area and your flower beds. Compost is good for flowers as well, and that's to be seen. I would doubt it. I think for many of us you need to have it up your sleeve that you can buy some compost in, but it depends what you're doing. I'm making in a year between 5 and 6 tons, and as my garden is now, I'm using rather less than I was before. I'm maybe going to use about 8 tons this winter, so I'm not going to need a huge amount more than what I'm making, but I'm bringing in quite a few materials to make this, and that is all good.